Chapter 1. A Ghost in the Ruins. The world was dead. It had been dead for a long time. The planet of Vedra, 9, once a thriving jewel in the galactic frontier, had become nothing more than a barren wasteland. Its skies choked with dust, its oceans dried into vast salt flats, and its cities reduced to silent, crumbling ruins. The satellites orbiting the planet had long since gone dark, and whatever technology remained had either been scavenged by passing looters or left to decay under the weight of time. It was supposed to be lifeless. And yet, as Captain Elias Rains stepped through the skeletal remains of what had once been a city, his scanner blinked red with a single life sign. He stopped mid-step, the crunch of debris under his boots echoing in the unnatural silence of the dead world. His brow furrowed as he glanced down at the holographic readout on his wrist. The scanner shouldn't be picking up anything. Vedra 9 had been abandoned for nearly a century, ever since the war between the Vedran people and the Kryn Dominion had left the planet scorched and ruined. No recorded life signs had been detected since the evacuation, and all intelligence reports had confirmed that the ecosystem had collapsed not long after. Yet here it was. A single heartbeat. Elias adjusted the settings on his scanner, ensuring it wasn't a malfunction or some kind of radiation signature throwing off the readings. The results came back the same. There was someone here. Someone alive. His grip tightened around his pulse rifle as he scanned the horizon. The towering ruins of the old capital rose like skeletal fingers, their once grand structures now nothing more than broken husks, their windows shattered, their walls scorched. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying the echoes of a civilization long gone, and for a moment, Elias felt like he was walking through the afterimage of a memory, a place frozen in time long after the last of its people had vanished. He moved carefully, his boots silent against the cracked pavement. The scanner directed him toward what had once been a grand temple. Its once beautiful spires now collapsed, its entrance partially buried under the weight of fallen stone. And inside, the life sign. He hesitated, exhaling slowly. This wasn't part of the mission. He had come here on a salvage run, searching for lost technology, not lost souls. But the thought of leaving without investigating, without knowing, didn't sit right with him. Elias pressed forward. The temple's entrance was blocked by a collapsed archway, but he found a way through a side passage, slipping into the dark interior where the temperature immediately dropped. His visor adjusted to the dim light, revealing the grand chamber ahead, now coated in layers of dust and shadow. At the center of the room, surrounded by candles that should have burned out decades ago, was a figure. A girl. She was curled into herself, her frame frail and motionless, wrapped in what looked like ancient ceremonial robes. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with glowing blue markings that pulsed faintly across her arms and neck. Her hair was long, silver white, cascading around her in a way that made her look like a ghost lost in time. Elias froze, his heart hammering. She was alive. Her chest rose and fell in slow, shallow breaths, but she wasn't awake. It was like she was in a deep, unnatural sleep, preserved against the decay of the world around her. The candles that encircled her flickered softly, their flames unnaturally still, untouched by the wind that howled through the broken temple walls. He lowered his rifle. This wasn't just some random survivor. She had been left here deliberately, preserved, protected, and that meant someone had wanted her to be found. The last of her kind. Elias moved carefully, stepping over the scattered remains of what had once been a shrine of intricate carvings and golden inlays, now dulled with dust and time. His eyes remained on the girl as he knelt beside her, his mind racing through the possibilities. Was she a survivor from before the war? No, that was impossible. No biological life form should have been able to survive 100 years without food, water, or proper environmental support. And yet, here she was, her breathing steady, her form untouched by age. A stasis field? Some kind of temporal anomaly? Elias had seen some strange things in his time, but this was beyond anything he had encountered before. He reached out, fingers hovering just above her shoulder. The moment he made contact, her eyes snapped open. A sharp jolt of energy surged through the chamber, a shockwave that sent dust flying and rattled the crumbling pillars. Elias recoiled, stumbling back as his visor flashed with error codes, his HUD momentarily scrambling. Then silence. He lifted his head. The girl was staring at him. Her eyes deep, luminous blue locked onto his, wide with something between fear and disbelief. Her lips parted, but no words came. Elias held up a hand, trying to show he wasn't a threat. Easy. I'm not here to hurt you. She didn't move, didn't even blink. Then, in a voice so soft he almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "You are real?" The question sent a chill down his spine. He swallowed hard. "Yeah, I'm real." Her expression trembled, her fingers tightening against the fabric of her robes as if grounding herself. Then, to his utter shock, her eyes filled with tears. "You came," she whispered, her voice breaking. Elias frowned. "I what?" She let out a shaky breath, pressing a hand over her chest, her glowing blue markings flickering. "I waited. For so long. I thought no one dashed," she swallowed. "I thought I was alone." Elias's stomach twisted. 100 years. 100 years of silence, isolation, waiting. He exhaled slowly. "You're not alone anymore." She stared at him for a long moment. Then, finally, her lips parted, and she spoke a name. Not his name, but a name nonetheless. Saris? Elias's blood ran cold. That name. He had heard it before, whispered in old war records, buried in the classified archives of a war long forgotten. Saris, the last heir of the Vadran High Council. A girl who had supposedly died with the rest of her people. But if she had died, then who was this? The realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. She wasn't just some lost survivor. She was the last soul on a dead world. And somehow, against all odds, she had been waiting for him. Chapter 2. The Weight of the Past. Elias Rains had never believed in ghosts. But at this moment, as he knelt before the silver-haired girl who had been asleep for a century, he wasn't so sure. The ruined temple was silent except for the whisper of the wind through the broken walls, carrying the weight of lost voices and forgotten prayers. The girl Saris, if that was truly her name, stared at him with wide, luminous eyes, her delicate fingers clutching at the fabric of her ceremonial robes as if grounding herself in reality. Her glowing blue markings flickered erratically across her skin, as if responding to the sheer impossibility of the moment. Elias was no stranger to war relics. He had salvaged the remains of derelict battleships, unearthed abandoned outposts, even stumbled upon preserved data logs from conflicts so ancient they had passed into myth. But never, not once, had he come across something like this. She had been waiting. For what? For whom? And why did she call him by a name that should not exist outside of classified war records buried deep in the archives of the Galactic Core? He took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "You said you were waiting. For what?" Saris blinked, as if she hadn't expected to be asked that question. Her gaze flickered downward, her fingers flexing against the dust-covered floor. "For the call," she murmured. "For the signal that it was safe. That the war had ended." Elias frowned. The war ended a century ago. A breath hitched in her throat. Then, we lost. It wasn't a question. Elias didn't answer immediately. He wasn't sure how to. Vadra 9 was a graveyard. Its people scattered across the stars or wiped from existence. If Saris had been waiting all this time for a message that never came, then she was truly alone. He exhaled. What happened here? Saris's fingers curled against the fabric of her robes. "I don't remember," she admitted. "Not everything. It's fragmented." She pressed a hand to her temple, her expression tightening as if trying to grasp at something just out of reach. "I remember the fire, the screams, the sky turning red, and then..." Her glowing eyes flickered as she met his gaze again. "And then I was here, waiting." Elias's stomach twisted. Whatever had happened to her, it wasn't natural. Stasis pods, cryogenic sleep, those were technologies he understood. But this was something else entirely. She should have withered, aged, deteriorated with time. Instead, she looked exactly as she must have a century ago. Untouched, preserved, frozen in time. And that raised another question. "Who put you here?" he asked. Saris hesitated. "The elders. Before the war began. They told me I would be safe." She let out a breath. "But they never woke me up." Elias rubbed a hand down his face. He could feel the weight of the past pressing down on this place, the weight of everything left unfinished. And now? Now, He had no idea what to do with her. An unlikely decision. Elias was no hero. He was a scavenger, a contractor, a man who worked for the highest bidder. He didn't rescue people. He didn't get involved in lost causes. But as he looked at Saris, sitting there amidst the ruins of a civilization that no longer existed, something deep and uncomfortable settled in his chest. She had spent 100 years waiting for someone to find her. Now that someone had, and if he left her here, if he turned his back and walked away, he knew exactly what would happen. Nothing. She would stay here, trapped in a world that would never wake up, in a temple that no longer had a purpose, waiting for a signal that would never come. And she would die here, alone. Elias sighed heavily. I can't believe I'm saying this, he muttered, mostly to himself. Then he looked at her. You need to come with me. Saris blinked. You mean off-world? Yes. Her breath caught. But dash. Look, Elias interrupted, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't know what happened here. I don't know why you're still alive. But if you stay, you're going to be stranded on a dead planet forever. That's not an option. He exhaled. You have no reason to trust me. I get that. But I'm your only way off this rock. Saris was silent for a long moment. Her fingers brushed against the floor, tracing faint, ancient carvings beneath the dust, the last remnants of a forgotten history. Then, softly, she whispered, I was always meant to leave. Elias frowned. What? She looked up at him, something shifting in her expression. The elders. Before they put me to sleep, they told me I had a purpose. That one day, I would have to leave this place. She hesitated. I just never thought I would be alone when it happened. Elias felt something in his chest tighten. You're not alone anymore, he said. Saris's eyes searched his face for something. Then, for the first time, she nodded. And just like that, her world, the only one she had ever known, was left behind. Escape from a forgotten graveyard. The journey back to Elias's ship was uneasy. The ruins seemed to watch them as they moved, as if the very bones of the dead world resented their departure. The dust that clung to the air felt heavier, the shadows deeper, as if the ghosts of the past had been stirred from their slumber. Saris walked in silent awe, her fingers brushing against the cracked surfaces of buildings that had once stood tall and proud. This was a city once, she murmured. It still is, Elias said. Just not a living one. Saris exhaled. It feels like it's holding its breath. Elias glanced at her. You remember much about it? Not as much as I should, she admitted. But the things I do remember, they don't match what I see now. That wasn't surprising. Whatever had happened to her had clearly affected her memory. There were gaps, missing pieces like a puzzle that had been scrambled, just enough to make the full picture impossible to see. But that was a problem for later. Right now, he just needed to get her off this planet. When they reached the outskirts of the ruins, his ship, a mid-sized hauler, battered but reliable, was still where he had left it. The engines hummed softly as the autopilot kept it prepped for launch, its metallic hull reflecting the crimson twilight of Vedra IX's dying sun. Saris hesitated at the threshold of the open airlock. Elias turned back to her. You good? She exhaled. It feels wrong. He frowned. Leaving? She nodded. Like I'm breaking something. Elias studied her for a long moment, then sighed. You're not breaking anything, he said. You're just finally moving forward. Saris stared at him. Then, slowly, she stepped onto the ship. The airlock hissed shut behind her. And for the first time in 100 years, the last soul on a dead world left it behind. Chapter 3. The Truth Buried in the Stars. The hum of the ship's engines was the only sound in the cramped cockpit, a steady vibration that filled the silence between them. Elias kept his hands steady on the controls, adjusting their trajectory as they slipped past the gravitational pull of Vedra IX, leaving the dead planet behind. Through the viewport, the ruins of an entire civilization shrank into the distance, swallowed by the blackness of space. It was a graveyard, a relic of a war no one spoke about anymore, a scar on the map of the galaxy. And now, for the first time in 100 years, someone had left it behind. Saris sat in the co-pilot's seat, her posture rigid, her hands clenched into her robes as she stared out at the void beyond. The glow of the ship's dashboard reflected in her eyes, giving her an almost ethereal appearance, like she wasn't entirely real. She had spent a century asleep, waiting for someone that never came. Now she was adrift in a world that had long since moved on without her, a ghost in a time that no longer belonged to her. Elias didn't know what to say to her, so he kept his focus on the controls, checking their course, making sure they weren't being followed, not that anyone would be out here. Vedra 9 was off the maps for a reason. No one came to this part of space unless they were looking for something long buried, or unless they were running from something. He finally broke the silence. "You doing okay?" Saris blinked, turning toward him slowly, as if she had forgotten he was there. "I don't know." Elias glanced at her. "Yeah, that's fair." She exhaled, her fingers twitching against her robes. "Everything is wrong. The stars are wrong. The way the ship moves, the way the air smells, even the way the silence feels." Her voice wavered. "Everything is different." Elias adjusted a few settings on the control panel. "Time does that." She turned back to the viewport. 100 years. "Yeah, 100 years," she repeated, softer this time, like she was testing the weight of the words. Then she looked at him. "And no one came back?" Elias hesitated. She already knew the answer, but asking it out loud made it real. "No," he admitted. "No one came back." She inhaled sharply, her shoulders tensing. "Then we lost." Elias didn't respond right away. He had read the reports, seen the records buried deep in the archives. The war between the Vedran Empire and the Kryn Dominion had been brutal. Vedra 9 had been the last stand, the final battle in a war that had already been decided long before the first shot was fired. When the dust settled, there was no one left to surrender. The Empire fell. The Dominion took what it wanted and abandoned the rest. And the galaxy moved on. But now, here she was. A survivor. A relic of a war she didn't even remember fully. Elias sighed, leaning back in his seat. "You don't have to figure everything out right now." Saris was quiet for a long time before finally nodding, but she didn't look convinced. A name from the past. The ship's navigation system chimed, alerting them that they had left Vedra 9's gravity well and entered deep space travel range. Elias set the autopilot, leaning back with a sigh, rubbing his temples. He had 100 different questions he wanted to ask Saris, but one in particular refused to leave his mind. That name, Saris. It shouldn't have existed outside of classified military files. But somehow, she knew it. Elias turned to her. "That name you said back on the planet. Saris. Where did you hear it?" Saris looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I don't know." Elias frowned. "You said it like it meant something." Her fingers curled into her sleeves. "It does. But I don't remember why." Elias exhaled. Saris wasn't just a name. It was an operation. A contingency plan the Vedran Empire had in place before the war ended. Something they were trying to hide. Saris's breath hitched. "Hide?" "Yeah," Elias said. "Problem is, no one ever figured out what it was. The records were destroyed when the Empire fell. Whatever Operation Saris was supposed to be, it died with the rest of your people." Saris looked away. "Then why do I know it?" Elias studied her. "That's what I'd like to find out." She was silent, her expression shifting through emotions too fast to name. Fear, confusion, maybe even something close to hope. "If I was part of it," she murmured, "then maybe I wasn't meant to survive." Elias didn't like where this was going. "Hey, let's not jump to the worst-case scenario." "But what if that's the only scenario?" Her voice was small. Elias didn't have an answer for that. The ghosts that follow. The ship's radar pinged. Elias's attention snapped back to the control panel, his fingers tightening against the console. That wasn't supposed to happen. They were supposed to be alone out here. But the radar said otherwise. Saris noticed the shift in his posture immediately. "What is it?" Elias's jaw clenched. "We've got company." Saris straightened. "Who?" Elias switched the display to external cameras, bringing up a holographic projection of the unknown vessel. It was small, sleek, the kind of ship built for speed and pursuit, and it was closing in fast. "Damn it," Elias muttered. Saris leaned closer. "Who are they?" Elias's stomach twisted. "Not someone we want to talk to." The comm system crackled to life, and a cold, mechanical voice filled the cockpit. "Unidentified vessel. You are carrying stolen property. Surrender immediately." Saris flinched. Stolen property? Elias exhaled. Yeah, I think they mean you. Saris's face went pale. Why? Elias didn't have an answer, but he knew one thing for sure. Whoever they were, they had been waiting for someone to find her. And now that she was awake, they were coming to take her back. Chapter 4. The Final Revelation. The cockpit was bathed in a red glow, the emergency alarms pulsing as Elias scanned the incoming vessel with a growing sense of unease. His ship, a battered but reliable long-hauler, was not built for combat. The unknown ship, however, was a Hunter-class interceptor, its sleek, angular hull bristling with weaponry. Elias didn't need a second opinion to know that if they decided to open fire, he wouldn't stand a chance. Saris sat rigid beside him, her fingers curled tightly against the armrests of her seat, her glowing blue markings dimming and flaring in rapid succession. Her breathing was unsteady, her mind racing through half-formed memories, trying to piece together the puzzle of who she was and why this ship was hunting her. Elias flipped the comms switch, forcing his voice into something resembling calm. "This is Captain Elias Rains," he said. "You're encroaching on independent space. Identify yourselves." A pause. Then, the comm system crackled, and the same cold, mechanical voice responded. "Surrender the asset." Elias's grip tightened. "Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. But if you're referring to my passenger, she's not an asset. She's a person." A sharp silence followed. Then, "She is unfinished. She must be recovered." Elias felt Saris tense beside him. Her fingers dug into the fabric of her robes, her breath coming quicker. "Unfinished," she whispered. Elias turned toward her, lowering his voice. "Do you know what they mean?" Saris shook her head, but something deep in her expression had shifted, a shadow of recognition, a flicker of something that had been buried beneath a century of stasis. Elias didn't like it. Before he could respond, the Hunter-class vessel activated a tractor beam. The ship shuddered as a graviton field locked onto their hull, pulling them toward the much larger vessel like a predator dragging its prey. Elias cursed, hitting the manual override. "Oh, hell no. We're not doing this." The engines flared as he tried to break free, but the interceptor's lock was too strong. Saris reached for his arm. "Stop," she said, her voice strained. Elias turned to her, frustration lacing his expression. "What?" Her eyes were too wide, her breathing erratic. "They won't kill me," she whispered. "Not yet. They need me for something." Elias narrowed his eyes. "Yeah, and I'm guessing whatever that is isn't good." She swallowed hard. "I have to know what they want." Elias studied her, his mind racing through every possible alternative. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. He was a mechanic, a scavenger, a man who had spent his life avoiding trouble. But now he was caught in something so much bigger than him, and for the first time in years, walking away wasn't an option, because Saris wasn't just some lost survivor. She was something else, something unfinished, and he was the only person standing between her and whatever fate these people had in store for her. The ship trembled as the docking clamps locked into place. The red light on the control panel flashed urgently. They were being boarded. Elias exhaled sharply. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see what they want." The truth in the dark. The airlock hissed open with a metallic groan, and 3 figures stepped inside. They were not Kryn. Elias had expected Dominion operatives, military officers, bounty hunters, maybe even mercenaries working for some unknown faction. But these figures were something else entirely. They were tall, their limbs unnaturally long, their bodies encased in sleek, jet-black armor. Their faces were hidden behind smooth, featureless helmets, with only a faint blue glow where their eyes should be. They moved with eerie precision, like machines wearing the skin of men. The tallest of them spoke first. "Unit designation, Saris 9, it said, its voice hollow and synthetic. "You have been activated before completion. You must be returned to the facility." Elias stepped between them and Saris instinctively, his pulse pounding in his skull. "Yeah, that's not happening," he said. The figure tilted its head. "This unit is irrelevant." Elias's jaw clenched. "Listen, pal dash." Saris spoke before he could finish. "What am I?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The figures turned to her. "You are the last of the Vadran project," the lead figure said. "A prototype. The final step in the Empire's survival initiative. Saris's breath caught. Survival initiative? The figure nodded. Vedra, 9 was a necessary sacrifice. The Empire understood that the war was unwinnable. You were designed as its contingency. Elias felt his blood run cold. What the hell does that mean? The figure's helmet turned toward him. The Empire was dying. They needed a solution. A way to preserve their legacy beyond destruction. So they created you. Saris's fingers trembled. I don't understand. You were never meant to be a person, the figure continued. You were meant to be a vessel. Silence stretched between them. Saris's lips parted. A vessel for what? The figure took a step closer. For the Empire itself. Its leaders. Its knowledge. Its soul. Elias felt his stomach drop. It clicked into place, all of it. The stasis. The fragmented memories. The glowing blue markings across her skin. Saris wasn't a survivor. She was a repository. A living archive of everything that had been lost when Vedra, 9 fell. Elias turned to her, but she was staring at nothing, her entire body shaking. No, she whispered. That's not. That can't be. You were the final phase, the figure said. The Empire poured its greatest minds into you. You are incomplete, but we can restore what is missing. You will carry them forward. You will be their rebirth. Elias took a step back. Oh, hell no. The figure regarded him. This unit is inconsequential. Elias drew his pulse pistol and shot the lead figure in the head. The bolt of energy ripped through its helmet, shattering the black plating, but there was no flesh underneath. Just wires. The figure staggered but did not fall. Its body flickered, repairing itself, as if the damage had never happened. Saris gasped. They're not real. The figure straightened. We are what remains. Elias grabbed Saris's wrist. We're leaving. Now. The figures moved to block them. Saris's markings flared violently, and the world exploded. The last soul, set free. When Elias's vision cleared, the figures were gone. Not destroyed. Not broken. Just gone. As if they had never been there at all. Saris stood beside him, her markings pulsing erratically, her breath ragged. Elias stared. What the hell did you just do? She shuddered. I don't know. But he saw it in her eyes. She did know, and it terrified her. Elias exhaled. You okay? Saris swallowed hard. I think I just erased them. A long silence stretched between them. Then Elias muttered, Okay, that's a new one. She let out a shaky laugh. Yeah. Elias looked at her. So, what now? Saris met his gaze, her eyes calmer than before. Now, she said, we find out who I really am. Elias smirked. You got it, kid. And with that, they left the past behind. For good.